The spoon in my hand trembled as I scooped another ladle of mashed potatoes onto my grandson's plate. I'd made them just the way he liked: extra butter, a dash of garlic, no lumps. He gave me a shy smile and whispered a thank you. That moment should have been enough to warm me, but it wasn't. Because right then, across the table, Tessa looked straight at me and said loud enough for the whole family to hear: "Jobless again, must be miserable, living like a failure." She laughed lightly afterward. Not a real laugh. The kind that dares you to challenge her. That paints cruelty as humor. Everyone went quiet. Even David. My own son. He didn't look up from his plate. Just let it hang there. Like her words didn't matter. Like I didn't matter. Let me know where you're listening from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this story speaks to you, share your thoughts below. Don't skip, because what happens at the end will surprise you more than the betrayal itself. That moment, Tessa's smirk, the silence that followed, wasn't the first cut. No, it was just the last straw in a house made of glass already cracked in too many places. I stared down at my plate and felt my face heat. Not from shame, from control, because I couldn't afford to react. She wanted me to. That's how she wins. So I smiled. Just a little. Enough to confuse her. Then I gently put my fork down, excused myself from the table, and walked out to the back porch. It was November. Cold. But I needed the air. The screen door creaked behind me as I shut it, muffling their chatter. I leaned on the railing and stared into the dark yard dotted with brittle leaves and the faint shimmer of frost. Jobless. Failure. I had once been so many things. A teacher for over 3 decades, a wife for 40 years, a mother, a community volunteer, a friend. But now, according to her, I was nothing more than a dependent burden. An extra mouth in the guest room, a reminder that time moves on and takes your usefulness with it. She didn't know what I'd given up. Or maybe she did. Maybe that was the point. I could still hear the scrape of chairs inside, the clink of dishes. She was probably already shifting the conversation, glossing over her cruelty like it was a joke. And David, well, he wouldn't challenge her. He hadn't in years. I hadn't always lived with them. After Henry died, I tried to manage on my own. I really did. The house was too big, too quiet. But it was mine. Until the plumbing went. Then the roof. Then my back gave out while shoveling snow. David said it made sense to sell. Said I'd be safer with them. And it did make sense. At first, Tessa welcomed me with a tight hug and a list of expectations cleverly disguised as suggestions. The guest room was mine, but please no clutter. The kitchen was shared, but she preferred to do the cooking. And maybe for the boys' sake, I shouldn't talk too much about the past. It confuses them. So I stayed quiet. I made myself small. I watched. Over the past 3 years, I had folded myself up like a paper crane in their lives. A decoration. Silent. Pretty. Fragile. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I still remembered everything. Every slight. Every shift. Every little thing she thought I wouldn't catch. And I had kept notes. Mental ones mostly. Some written. Tucked away. Patterns, dates, people, expenses that didn't add up, voices behind closed doors, lies, so many lies. But I didn't confront. Not yet. Because you don't shout at a storm. You wait for it to pass, Then you pick up the debris and show the world what was broken. I stared at the stars and let my breath slow. There was peace in the cold. I remembered the first time Tessa ever visited our home back when David was still in college. She wore this sky blue blouse and shook my hand like I was a client, not a mother. I didn't dislike her then, but I didn't trust her either. Henry warned me not to be too protective. He has to make his own choices, he'd said. He was right. But choices come with consequences. I just never thought I'd be the one paying for his. Behind me, the door creaked again. David stepped out, rubbing his arms in the chill. "Mom," he said softly. "She didn't mean it like that." I didn't turn around. "Yes, she did." A pause. "Then she's just under stress." "Things at work, David." I finally turned to look at him. "You don't have to explain. You've been making excuses for her since the wedding." He winced. "I'm tired," I said. "I'm going to bed." He nodded, but I saw the guilt in his eyes. He knew. He always had. But it was easier to look away. I walked past him back into the house that smelled like rosemary chicken and artificial harmony. The boys were on the couch now, playing on their tablets. Tessa stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, watching me. "I didn't mean to upset you," she said, but her voice was too smooth. I didn't reply. Because I wasn't upset. I was ready. She thought I had no power, no purpose, no strength. But that was the gift of being invisible. You see everything. And when the time comes, you remind them. Before I became the woman who kept quiet at dinners and took notes in silence, I was Maggie Henley, Margaret to my mother, Miss Henley to 30 years' worth of second graders, and simply Mags to my husband, Henry. I used to wake up at 5:30 every morning without an alarm. My hands would be stiff, my knees sore, but I'd still start the day with a hum and a stretch. Coffee, oatmeal, my lesson plan in my hand. I was someone. And even though I didn't chase dreams or wear lipstick often, I had built a life full of meaning, one small brick at a time. Henry and I met at the old movie theater in town. I was 24, chaperoning a school field trip. He was 30, quiet and handsome, with the kind of hands that looked like they knew how to build things. He didn't try to impress me with jokes or swagger. He just offered me the last red licorice rope from his bag and said, "I've got more at home, but I don't share those." We married 2 years later. A simple ceremony, no drama, just friends, family, and enough chicken salad to feed the whole church. He was a mechanic and proud of it. Built his own garage and ran it for nearly 4 decades. I always told him he had more heart in his hands than most people had in their whole bodies. He never liked compliments, though. Just grinned and went back to work. When David was born, our lives shifted. Not drastically, but gently, like a new song layered into the background of one you already loved. I stayed home for the first year, then returned to teaching part-time. Henry took on fewer repair jobs, so he could be there for bedtime. We didn't have wealth, but we had peace. Stability. We made things work. David was our pride, our only child. A good boy. Smart but quiet like his father. Sensitive. He'd help me bake cookies on Sundays, then sit on the garage floor and hand Henry wrenches while they listened to baseball on the radio. He cried the day his hamster died. Cried again the day I couldn't make it to his piano recital because of a parent-teacher conference. I still remember how small he looked on that stage. We raised him with love and boundaries. We didn't spoil. We saved. When he got into university, the first in our family, we were thrilled. I took on extra tutoring. Henry worked weekends again. Every dollar mattered, but not because we cared about appearances. We just wanted David to fly. And then came Tessa. At first I thought she was just one of many girls David might date in college. Pretty polished and always ready with a compliment. "You don't look old enough to be a teacher," she told me once. I smiled, but I knew the tone. It was the kind of line meant to flatter and disarm. She came from money. Old money, not flashy. Her parents were all about vineyards and summer homes. Her mother wore heels to breakfast, and her father had opinions about proper lawn care, even though he hadn't mowed one himself in years. I wasn't intimidated. I just felt tired when I was around them. Still, if David loved her, I'd find a way. They married right after graduation, a big ceremony. Henry and I offered to pay for part, but her parents insisted on covering everything. We ended up in the back row during the photo sessions, told where to stand, what to wear. I told myself it didn't matter. I held Henry's hand through it all. A year later, we got the news grandbaby number 1 on the way. I cried. So did Henry. We painted a nursery in our house even though they had no plans to move in. Just the thought of a little one visiting made our hearts fuller. Those years, they were good. Before the shift, before things began to feel uneven. It started with little things. A tone in Tessa's voice when I offered to babysit. A look she gave when I brought over homemade soup. The time she suggested I stop bringing old-fashioned board games for the boys because they prefer tablets now, and David, he didn't see it. Or maybe he chose not to. Then Henry got sick. It was sudden. A cancer that moved too fast. I was still reeling when we buried him. The love of my life gone in a season. He left me with our home, his tools, and a garage that smelled like motor oil and lemon hand soap. Grief swallowed me. David and Tessa offered for me to move in. "It's temporary," she'd said. "Just until you get your footing." But we both knew what she meant. She didn't think I could live alone anymore. So I sold the house. Not because I wanted to. Because I was tired. Because the roof was leaking and the heater groaned at night. Because I missed Henry in every corner. I gave up more than bricks and wood. I gave up my independence. In their home, I became a guest. The guest room was clean sparse. No space for my books or the old rocking chair. Just enough room for a single photo of Henry on the dresser and the echo of my thoughts every night. I tried to help, cooked meals, folded laundry, walked the kids to school. But Tessa always made it clear this wasn't my home. These weren't my routines. She didn't shout. She didn't scold. She just rewrote the rules around me. Quietly. Thoroughly. I started keeping a journal. At first to process my grief, then to track. Because something felt wrong. Receipts that didn't make sense. Voices late at night. Lies about money. The way Tessa snapped at David, then kissed him on the cheek when I entered the room. I didn't say anything, but I remembered. Every little thing. So when she called me a failure at that dinner table, it wasn't her cruelty that cut me. It was the weight of everything I had swallowed. Everything I had endured in silence. Because there's a difference between being quiet and being weak. And she had forgotten that. It was the spring after I moved in that I noticed it, the first real fracture. A crack not in the walls, but in the rhythm of the house. Something small. Off. Tessa started locking the master bedroom during the day. At first I thought it was an accident, then a habit. But on the third Wednesday of April, I came home early from the grocery store and heard muffled voices from inside. Male voices. Not David's. By the time I got to the top of the stairs, the bedroom door was closed, locked, and the voices gone. Tessa opened it 2 minutes later. Hair, perfect smile, thinner than usual. "Didn't hear you come in," she said, breezing past me like a gust of perfume and nerves. I didn't ask questions. Not then. Instead, I made tea. I found that people tell you more when you're quiet. Let them fill the space. They always do. And Tessa, she filled it with stories about stressful deadlines, difficult client surprise home visits from contractors. But things didn't add up. Not when I saw the same unfamiliar black SUV parked 2 blocks down on random afternoons. Not when she suddenly had a new bracelet, a brand she used to call excessively showy. She was careful. I'll give her that. But not careful enough. And David. He was slipping away too. Not in the dramatic disappearing kind of way. No, David became smaller, softer, more tired. He stopped coming into the guest room to say goodnight to me, something he'd always done since I moved in. He missed Sunday breakfast. He skipped the boys' soccer games. He started saying things like, "Don't get involved, Mom," and "It's not a big deal." But it was a big deal, because I'd spent my life learning how to read between the lines. And what I saw was a son being slowly bent out of shape to fit someone else's mold. Tessa began referring to their life as her household, her schedule, her decisions. Even the boys started echoing it. "Mom says we don't do things that way in our house." Our house. Not mine, not David's. Just hers. I tried to chalk it up to modern marriage. Shifting dynamics. Every generation's different, right? But deep down I knew. Control doesn't always come with shouting or bruises. Sometimes it comes dressed in smiles and passive words. It looks like a color-coded calendar where your name doesn't appear. It looks like birthday parties planned without asking the grandmother if she's free. One night, I found David sitting outside in his car, engine off, just sitting there, alone. I brought him a mug of hot chocolate. He looked up startled, then gave me that tired smile I'd come to hate. The one that said, "Please don't ask." But I did anyway. "Is everything okay?" He hesitated. "Just tired, Mom. Long day. You don't come home late when it's a good day," I said quietly. His eyes dropped. "She means well." There it was again. That phrase. She means well. I nodded and handed him the mug. "Don't let someone wrap you in guilt and call it love." He flinched. "I saw it." But he didn't reply. Tessa ramped things up the following month. She started rearranging the kitchen. Decluttering, she called it. My tea tins vanished. So did Henry's old mug. The hand towels I liked were replaced with ones that matched her aesthetic. Just streamlining, she told me with a smile. I smiled back. And bought a lockbox. Not for valuables. For records. I began scanning documents, taking photos, backing up files on a drive David didn't know existed. I copied emails, receipts, messages she left on sticky notes. Her routines, her sudden absences, her moods. I wasn't planning anything yet, but I needed to be ready, because control doesn't just appear, it builds. Slowly. In layers. Until you look up and realize the person holding the puppet strings is calling it help. The final crack came the night she canceled my volunteer shift at the library. She didn't ask, didn't even tell me. She just emailed the coordinator and said Margaret won't be available anymore. Her memory's been slipping and we'd rather keep her close to home. Memory. Slipping. I still remember my student rosters from 1987. I remember the name of every child I ever taught who had a stutter or a fear of thunder. I remember the exact moment Henry proposed the song that played The Wind in the Trees. But now she was planting seeds, whispers of forgetfulness, laying groundwork, and that was war. She didn't know I saw the email, didn't know the librarian called me gently asking if I was all right, if I needed help. No, I didn't need help. I needed a plan. That night, I sat in bed and pulled out the old ledger I'd kept tucked between the pages of my Bible. Every name, every date, every slight, every crack. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about truth. And when I told it when I finally laid it bare, I wouldn't shout. I'd whisper, because that's what terrifies people like Tessa. A whisper in the dark that proves they've been seen all along. I stopped speaking as much after that, not because I was afraid, but because I realized the power of silence. People mistake it for weakness, for surrender. But the truth is, silence listens, and silence sees. I became invisible in my own house, or rather Tessa's house, as she liked to call it now. She had the deed, she had the routines, she had the boys rehearsing lines like Mom says Grandma needs to rest more, and I let her have it. At least that's what she thought. When Tessa entered a room, I busied myself in another. When she hosted wine nights with her friends, I made tea quietly upstairs. She stopped inviting me to family events, claimed I forgot them, or mixed up the times. I always showed up anyway early, dressed properly, smiling. I could tell it irritated her, because I didn't argue. I watched. Every Thursday, the same man pulled into the neighborhood in the black SUV. He never stayed long, maybe an hour, sometimes 2. Tessa always wore the same coat on those days. Pale blue wool with a cream scarf. Too nice for errands, too carefully styled for coincidence. Once I followed them. Not closely. Just enough to see them sit in a coffee shop far from town. She laughed. Touched his hand once. He wore a wedding ring. I took a photo. I never said a word. David was drifting. I could see it in the slouch of his shoulders, the way he stared into his coffee without drinking it. He stayed late at work, came home past dinner. And when he was home, the air between him and Tessa was tight like a balloon stretched too far. He didn't see me anymore. Not really. Not the way he used to. I became furniture. Background. But furniture can still hold weight. One Saturday morning, I saw the boys arguing over breakfast. The older one, Eli, was upset because Tessa had promised to take him to the science museum, then canceled. Again. She said she had important work, he mumbled. I looked at him. That place will still be there next weekend. He nodded, but his little fists were clenched. She forgets a lot, he added. I stored that away too. I began organizing what I knew. I used my old teacher's planner, still crisp, barely touched since retirement. On each page, I wrote down incidents, dates, patterns, lies. Her stories didn't line up. Sometimes it was a sick coworker. Sometimes a surprise board meeting. Always an excuse. She didn't know I was watching her, but she made sure to watch me. I caught her in my room once. She didn't think I'd come home early from the pharmacy. She was holding one of my old notebooks, flipping through it. I cleared my throat. She spun around fast, pretending to be startled. Oh, I was just looking for that book you said you were going to lend me. About, gardening? I walked past her, took the notebook gently and set it on my desk. It's not about gardening. She smiled tight. Right. Silly me. I didn't call her out. Instead, I offered her tea. She declined. From then on, I kept the notebook somewhere safer. Not under my bed, not in drawers. No people like Tessa look in the obvious places, so I put them in the basement freezer inside a labeled tub of chicken stock, the pages sealed tight in plastic. Let her dig through that if she was curious. But I also began doing something new. I started backing up everything to a secure online folder. My late friend from the library, George, had taught me how. He was a retired IT teacher, and when he passed, he left me access to a private cloud storage account he'd set up for his archives. I'd never thought I'd use it for this, but here we were. Every photo, every receipt, every text I managed to glimpse. Safe, logged. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew this much: it was no longer about comfort. It was about survival. Because it wasn't just about what Tessa said to me, it was about what she was becoming. Manipulative, calculated, dismissive of everyone who didn't serve her image. And David. He was too worn down to see it clearly. He lived in a fog of avoidance. I remembered one evening back when David was 12. He came home from school with bruises on his arm. Some older kid had shoved him hard on the playground. He said it was no big deal, that it didn't hurt. But that night I heard him crying in his room. I sat with him, held his hand, and said, "The things we say don't hurt us, so are usually the ones that do the most." Now here we were again. He was crying quietly, just in a different way. And I couldn't protect him the way I used to, but I could prepare. I started sending small pieces of evidence to a trusted friend, Lisa, one of the teachers I used to mentor. She was level-headed, discreet, and owed me more than one favor. I told her I was building something. I didn't give all the details. Not yet, but I asked her to hold on to a flash drive for me. Just in case something happens, I said. She nodded without asking further. That's how you know who's real. The silence between me and Tessa grew louder. She avoided me more. The boys still loved me, but they began to sense the tension too. They started knocking on my door before entering. They whispered when I was nearby, not because they were scared, because they were confused. She was changing the air in the house, but I had lived through worse. I had stood by a hospital bed holding Henry's hand as he slipped away. I had buried my parents. I had built a life from scratch. I had watched my world crumble and found the strength to rebuild it again. Tessa underestimated me because I smiled, because I stayed calm, because I wore cardigans and baked banana bread. But the thing about women like me, we remember everything, and we don't play the game. We change it. I was never powerless. They just mistook my patience for permission. There's a difference, because the silence they thought was surrender, it wasn't. It was study. The same way I used to sit at the back of the classroom during parent-teacher conferences and observe the tired dad who never smiled, the mom who interrupted her child every time he tried to speak. You can learn everything about people if you watch them when they think no one is watching back. I didn't have money. I didn't have the title to the house. I didn't even have my own mailbox. Tessa insisted everything be digital to save space. But I had something she couldn't touch. Time and memory, and the kind of calm that only comes from knowing you're going to win. I called my lawyer Martin one afternoon. He'd been semi-retired since his wife passed, but he still took the occasional case, quiet ones, personal ones. He'd also been Henry's best friend, the kind of man who helped me change a flat tire once without ever mentioning it again. He met me at a diner 2 towns over. We didn't meet at his office. I didn't want Tessa knowing I'd spoken to anyone. I slid a folder across the table. Photos, copies of receipts, a list of names and dates. He flipped through it slowly, his brow furrowing with each page. "You've been busy," he said quietly. "I've been patient." He looked up. "What are you asking for, Maggie?" I thought about it for a moment. "I want the house. Legally. I want a full audit of Tessa's financial activity connected to the family accounts, and I want to know where my son's money is going." Martin nodded. "It'll take time. I've waited long enough." He smiled, then that sad, respectful smile older men give women like me when they realize we've stopped asking for permission. I left the diner with a lightness in my step. Not joy, not yet, but direction. I stopped by the park on the way home, watched the ducks in the pond, the kids running around with sticky fingers and popsicle-stained shirts. I thought of David when he was little, how he used to hold my hand and tell me I was better than a superhero. Now he barely looked me in the eye. But I wasn't doing this to get him back. I was doing this so that when the collapse came, there would be clarity. No shouting matches, no dramatics, just the truth, heavy and undeniable. That weekend, I noticed something new. Tessa had started locking the office. I'd never needed to go in there. It was her space, her setup, her kingdom of spreadsheets and sleek monitors. But now it was off limits. She even added a keypad lock. I didn't push. Instead, I added that to the folder. I asked Martin to begin proceedings quietly. A trust inquiry. Title contestation. He assured me it would move slow but sure, like water creeping under a door. "You sure you want to play it this way?" he asked once. "I don't want to play at all," I replied. "I want it over." Because here's the thing about women like me, women who've spent their lives in service to others, who've been called sweet and nice and quiet so often they start to believe it's all they are. When we wake up, we don't yell. We act. I started planting the seeds of distance with the boys, not between us, but between them and the noise. I gave them journals, told them they could write anything in them, that I wouldn't peek, that it was their safe place. Tessa didn't like that. "Why fill their heads with old habits?" she said one night. "Kids don't need pens, they need to learn to code. They need to learn to feel first," I replied. She rolled her eyes, but I saw Eli scribbling in his journal the next morning before school. The cracks in her image widened week by week. She forgot to pick the boys up twice in 1 month. Claimed her meetings ran late. David started coming home earlier again. I saw him staring at her differently. Less admiration, more confusion. One night I passed by their bedroom on my way to the laundry room and heard muffled arguing. "She doesn't do anything," Tessa hissed. "She just sits there." "She raised me," David replied. "She's not furniture, Tessa." I didn't smile, but I remembered that line. She's not furniture. No, I wasn't. I was the foundation. I called Martin the next morning and gave him the go-ahead on the final piece and affidavit stating my financial contribution to the original purchase of the house, including the inheritance I'd used from my parents. It was legally murky, but morally rock solid. Tessa had built her empire on the assumption that I'd always choose peace over pride. She never considered that sometimes they're the same thing. I began moving things out of the guest room. Not dramatically, just a photo frame here, a keepsake there. I shipped boxes to Lisa's house. Cleared the space quietly. I didn't need to be thrown out. I was already walking away. Because when the truth came to light, and it would, I didn't want to be standing in her house. I wanted her to be standing in mine. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I heard the first real crack in her voice. Tessa was on the phone pacing in the hallway outside the laundry room, where she thought I wasn't paying attention. But that room carried sound like a confession booth. "No, I told you I can't wire anything else right now." Her voice was sharp, urgent. A pause. "Because it's not just my account anymore. He's watching the transfers." She lowered her voice after that, but not enough. "I don't care what we agreed on. If this leaks, I'm the one who loses everything." I stopped folding towels. My heart didn't race. I didn't smile. I just listened. I knew it would start like this. When a web starts unraveling, it doesn't tear all at once. It unspools, a thread at a time. Quiet. Relentless. Over the next week, I noticed her patterns changing. She left the house less, stayed glued to her phone more. Her laptop barely left her side. She even brought it to dinner one night, claiming she was on call for a client emergency. David didn't argue, but his eyes flicked up once, met mine. He looked unsure. And unsure was progress. The next day, Martin called. "She's made 3 wire transfers from a joint account that's legally questionable," he said. "The paperwork you gave me last month? It's holding up." He didn't say what I wanted to hear next. So I asked, "Do I have a case?" He was quiet a moment. "Margaret, you have more than a case. You have a story. And she doesn't know how much you already own of it." I thanked him, hung up, and made pie. It wasn't for anyone in the house. It was for me. Something about rolling dough, pressing it into a dish, filling it with apples and cinnamon, it grounded me, reminded me of who I used to be. Still was somewhere under the grief and betrayal and quiet calculations. When Tessa came into the kitchen, she wrinkled her nose. "Sugar again. No wonder your clothes are getting tighter." I wiped my hands on my apron. "I've got a lot on my plate," I said calmly. She smirked at her own pun, not realizing the truth buried in it. 2 nights later, David confronted her. I didn't see it, but I heard it. Late. After midnight. The boys were asleep. I was lying awake in my bed, lights off, listening through the vent. What's going on with the accounts, Tessa? Silence. Don't pretend you don't know. The savings, the withdrawals, the private card. My card. Still no answer. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of a voice trying to cry, but caught in a lie instead. "You've been snooping," she snapped. "You've been stealing," David fired back. I sat up, heart steady, focused. "You said you were investing, helping us grow our future. I trusted you." I heard movement, a chair scraping, footsteps. "You don't understand how hard it is to carry this whole family," she snapped. "You don't lift a finger. Your mother does more around here than you." Silence. And that's when it happened. That silence. Thick. Loaded. And then David said it. "She's the only one who hasn't lied to me." I closed my eyes. That line, that single quiet line, meant everything. It meant he saw it now. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough. Tessa didn't speak to me for 3 days. She moved through the house like a ghost, with perfect hair, silent but seething. The boys sensed it. They stayed close to me. Asked me to read more at bedtime. Asked questions like, "Why is Mommy mad, and did you do something wrong?" "No," I told them gently. "Sometimes grown-ups just make messy choices." They nodded like they understood. I don't know if they did, but they would. One morning, Tessa knocked on my door. I opened it. She looked tired, like someone who'd run a marathon in heels. "I need to talk to you," she said without any edge. I stepped aside. She didn't sit, just stood near the window, arms crossed. "I don't know what you've been saying to David," she started. I stayed quiet. "But he's acting like everything is my fault. Like I'm the villain in some play you've been writing in your head." I folded my hands in front of me. "I haven't said a word to him," I said. "Not until last week." She turned to look at me. "You're lying." "No," I said, voice low. "I just waited." She blinked, then laughed, dry, bitter. "You think you're so clever. You think you're going to turn him against me. Take everything." I stepped closer. "I don't want to take anything. I want the truth to stand where it belongs." She stepped back. "You're old. Alone. No court's going to side with you." "Maybe," I said, "but the truth already has." She didn't reply. Just left the room, her step stiff. I locked the door behind her. That evening, David came home early. We sat outside, just the two of us. No words at first. Just the cold breeze brushing against the porch rails and the quiet hum of the neighborhood settling down. "I'm sorry," he said finally. I looked at him. He stared straight ahead, for not seeing it, for letting it get this far, for making you live like this. I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because I'd already cried all those tears years ago. "I raised you better," I said softly. "I know. I always thought you'd stand up for me. I didn't expect you'd need me to stand up for you." His jaw clenched, and then he said something I didn't expect. "I want to help fix it." I shook my head. "No. I'll fix it. You just stand back." He turned to look at me confused. "Why?" "Because you need to see what it looks like when a woman finishes what she never started." The house was quiet the night I chose to speak. Not dramatic silence, just stillness. The kind that settles after a long day of truth, slowly leaking into the corners of every room. David had put the boys to bed. Tessa had shut herself in the office earlier, and I'd heard the lock click. She was trying to hold on to something. Control, maybe. Or the illusion of it. But I wasn't interested in wrestling her anymore. I was done watching. It was time. David was in the kitchen when I walked in, still in his work shirt sleeves rolled up, staring into a half-empty glass of water like it might have the answers he didn't. He looked up when I stepped in. Just a glance. "You have a minute?" I asked. He nodded. I didn't sit right away. I moved slowly, deliberately, and pulled out the chair across from him. Sat. Folded my hands. Waited. He broke the silence first. "She's been different since you talked to her." "I didn't talk to her," I said. "I talked at her." "There's a difference." He looked away, lips twitching with something close to guilt. "I need to tell you what I know." He hesitated. "Mom." "No," I said gently but firmly. "No interruptions. Not tonight." He nodded once. I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out the envelope I'd prepared. Thick, plain. No names on the outside. Inside, bank statements, printed screenshots, photos, copies of legal documents, including the trust papers Martin had drawn up. I slid it across the table toward him. He didn't touch it. She's been taking money from the family account for over a year, I said. Large amounts. Some wired directly to a man named Declan Fraser. His head snapped up. I nodded. He's married. 2 kids. Works at an investment firm outside town. I've seen them together. David's face began to pale. She's also rerouted some of the kids' education savings into a secondary account under her name. New identity, different address. Set up months ago. Still, he didn't speak. You know the strange charges that started showing up last fall, consulting fees? Design deposits. None of that's real. They were cover names for transfers. He blinked rapidly like he was processing but couldn't keep up. How do you know all this? I watched. You've been spying? No, I said calmly. I've been surviving. He looked away again. David, when you were a boy, you used to leave your toys on the stairs. I told you you'd trip one day. You didn't believe me. Until you did. And you cried. Not because you were hurt, but because you knew I'd been right and you hadn't listened. He didn't smile. Didn't argue. I loved her once, I said. Not as a daughter, but as someone who made you happy. That was enough for me. Until it wasn't. The envelope sat there between us like a landmine. She humiliated me at dinner, I continued. Not the words. Those I could survive. It was what she meant. The way she tried to shrink me in front of my grandchildren. In front of you. He finally looked at me. Really looked. I'm sorry, he said again, softer this time. I'm not looking for sorry, I replied. I'm looking for truth. He swallowed hard. And now that you have it, I said, nodding toward the envelope, you have to decide what kind of man you're going to be. He opened it, flipped through slowly. I let the silence stretch. Let it press down. After several minutes, he spoke, voice tight. Is this why you called Martin? Yes. Are you planning to press charges? No. His brow furrowed. Then what I'm giving her a choice, I said. He sat back, watching me with a mix of dread and admiration. What choice? She walks, leaves quietly, no legal mess, no scandal. She signs over her share of the house. She makes a clean break. And if she doesn't, I folded my hands again. Then we let the truth go public. He didn't speak for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked like it was counting down to something. Eventually he stood, took the envelope with him. I need to talk to her, he said. I nodded. Not tonight. Not angry, not loud, just honest. He hesitated at the door. Why now? Because I needed you to see it on your own first. He turned to go, then paused. Mum. Yes. You're not weak? I never thought you were. I didn't smile. I just said, you didn't want to think I was strong. And that was the problem, wasn't it? Not just with him. With so many people. They think quiet women are soft. That kindness is compliance. That age is frailty. But I had spent decades being overlooked, underestimated, and it gave me a view from the shadows that people like Tessa never saw coming. That night, I slept without locking my door, not because I trusted her, but because I finally trusted myself. By morning, the house was already different, not louder, not messier, just shifted. Like the axis had tilted and none of us were walking the same anymore. David didn't go to work. He was still in his robe, pacing quietly in the living room when I came down with the laundry basket. He looked up when he saw me, eyes tired, jaw tight. "She knows." I nodded. "I figured." She cried, screamed, then threatened to leave and take the boys. I kept folding a towel. "And what did you say?" He swallowed. That she'd have to explain why their college funds disappeared. "Good. Not angry. Just steady. Facts." "She said you manipulated me," he added. I stopped folding. "And do you believe that?" He shook his head, but not with confidence, more like a man shaking off the dust of a long, heavy dream. "No." Then softer, "I don't know what I believe anymore." We were quiet for a few seconds. "She won't go easy," he said finally. "You know that." "She'll go." He looked at me, searching my face. "You sound so sure." "I am, because Tessa didn't love David. Not the way real love works. Real love bends and reshapes and sometimes hurts, but it doesn't strategize. And when someone like Tessa is cornered, they don't fight. They flee. David took the day off to take the boys out, just him and them. He didn't say where they were going, but I knew he needed space. I didn't stop him. After the door closed behind them, I made tea and waited. Not long. She came into the kitchen within the hour, face flushed, holding her phone like a weapon. "You really think you're going to win this, don't you?" I took a sip. "I already have." She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You think David's going to throw away 10 years for some receipts? Some photographs?" "I think he's already thrown away 10 years. Now he's trying to salvage what's left." "You're such a..." "Careful," I said, not loud, not threatening, just final. She stared at me, fury rising, but I could tell underneath it there was something else. Fear. It was always there in people like her, buried under the arrogance, the charm, the manipulation, and once it rises to the surface, they become sloppy. "I could still ruin you?" she whispered. "You already tried." Her lips tightened. I set my cup down and stood up. "There's a document waiting with Martin," I said. "An agreement. Clean. Quiet. You walk away. You take nothing but what's yours. And we don't press charges." Her face twisted. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I stepped closer. Not threatening, just firm. The way I used to when a parent tried to lie for their child at a conference. "Tessa." "I said you underestimated the wrong woman. You thought I'd fold because I bake cookies and wear soft shoes. But I've been watching you, learning you, and the one thing I've never seen in your eyes is honor." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. So I continued. "You can leave with dignity or you can leave with headlines. That's your choice." She turned to storm out, classic deflection, but I stopped her at the door. "One more thing," I said. She paused, hand on the knob. "Don't ever tell my grandchildren that you left because of me. Don't rewrite the story. They'll know the truth one day, and when they do, I want it to come from your silence, not your lies." She didn't look back. Didn't need to. I knew I'd already won. She left the house that night. No bags. Just her purse and her pride, both considerably emptier than the day before. David came home with the boys an hour later. I was in the kitchen wiping down the counters. "She's gone," he said quietly. I nodded. The boys ran into the living room none the wiser. Still laughing about something. Still holding on to childhood like it wouldn't slip through their fingers in the next blink. "She say anything before she left?" he asked. I paused. "She said, 'I think I'm going to win.'" He nodded slowly. She was right. Neither of us smiled. Because it wasn't over. It was just beginning. Tessa had threads in this town, friends, social clout, people who believed her smile before they believed the truth. But I wasn't scared of that. Not anymore. I'd spent too long living behind drawn curtains and forced politeness. Now I'd open the windows. Let everyone see the truth for themselves. The fallout wasn't immediate, but it came. Quietly. Precisely. The first ripple hit when Martin submitted the documentation to challenge the deed. Legally, my share was strong. Morally, even stronger. Then came the call from the school Tessa had missed a parent-teacher meeting. Again. Then whispers in the grocery store. The post office, the church foyer. Not cruel gossip, just curiosity. The kind that eventually lands like a stone. David fielded most of it. He didn't defend her, but he didn't attack either. He just said things are changing and left it at that. And for the first time in years, I felt the ground beneath me. Solid. Real. Not someone else's foundation. Mine. The first real consequence came in the form of a bank statement. David brought it to me late one evening, still warm from the printer. He looked pale when he handed it over, like someone who'd seen a ghost and now had the paperwork to prove it. She emptied the education fund, he said. The whole thing. I took the paper without a word. He paced the kitchen, the heels of his hands pressed against his forehead. I thought she only touched it. Maybe skimmed it here and there. But this is everything, Mum. Eli and Jonah's college fund? Gone. I ran my thumb across the edge of the paper, scanning the transactions. It wasn't just gone. It had been routed, laundered through side businesses, dummy consulting fees, withdrawals to unknown vendors, all over the course of a year. She hadn't just misused the money. She'd planned to disappear with it. I folded the statement and slid it into my folder without a word. David sat down hard in the chair across from me, burying his face in his hands. I trusted her. I know, I said gently. I loved her. You still do, I replied. But now you see her. He lifted his head slowly. What do we do? I met his eyes. We make sure the boys never have to carry the cost of your mistake. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't meant to wound him. But the truth sometimes walks on bones before it settles. I can sell the garage, he said. I can cash out my life insurance. No, I interrupted. You don't start bleeding for her mistakes, but the boys will be fine, I said firmly. Because we're not done yet. Tessa hadn't signed the deed transfer. Not yet. But Martin had already sent notice to her temporary address. And I had one more card to play. 2 days later, I scheduled a meeting with Declan Fraser, the man behind the wire transfers, the man with a ring on his finger and secrets in his phone. He didn't know me, but I knew enough about him where he worked the coffee shop he visited every Thursday, the name of his daughter's ballet school. I didn't threaten. I just asked for 15 minutes of his time. We met at the same diner I'd seen him in with Tessa once before. He looked nervous when I sat down, polite but wary. I know who you are, I said. He didn't respond, just sipped his coffee and waited. I don't want anything from you. No money, no trouble. I just need one thing. I slid a printed email across the table. It was a thread between him and Tessa discussing future plans, shared finances, and a potential business launch in Florida. I need your signature, I said. stating this is real, that the money transferred to your accounts wasn't business-related. He paled. That's personal. That could ruin me. Then you should have thought of that before helping a married woman drain her children's education fund. He stared at the paper. I reached into my bag and placed a sealed envelope on the table. In this envelope, I said, is a copy of every transaction plus a draft of the statement. You sign it, this stays between us. You don't, and I send it to your wife and every regulatory board you're tied to. He picked up the pen, signed, left without finishing his coffee. And just like that, the second domino fell. Martin filed the revised affidavit that same afternoon. David had tears in his eyes when I told him, Mom, what happens if she comes back? She won't. She's not the type to disappear. No? I agreed. But she's the type to run when the spotlight hits her. We didn't hear from her for 2 weeks. Not a text, not a call, not even a cryptic email. Then the house got a letter, hand-delivered. No return address. Inside a single-page document signed and notarized. Tessa relinquishing all claim to the home. No apology. No explanation. Just the signature. David held it in his hands like something sacred, something heavy. And for the first time since this all began, I saw his shoulders drop. Not from defeat, but from relief. The next few days were strange, quiet, almost peaceful, but not without grief, because even though the truth had won, something had still been lost. David mourned her in his own way. He didn't talk about her, but I saw him pause by the boys' art projects she'd hung on the fridge. Saw him catch himself before texting her about something small like a funny joke or a grocery item. You don't stop loving someone overnight. You just start loving the truth more. The boys adjusted faster than he did. Kids do that. They ask questions, they cry, but they adapt. Eli asked me one night, Is Mommy gone forever? I sat on his bed and smoothed his hair. She's not here right now, I said. And that's the best thing for everyone. Did she do something bad? I thought about it. Yes, I said gently, but people who do bad things aren't always bad people. Sometimes they just stop being the right kind of person for the people around them. He seemed to accept that. Kids understand things deeper than we think, especially when you tell them the truth in a way that doesn't shatter their hearts. That weekend I baked. The boys helped. David stayed in the living room pretending not to cry when he smelled cinnamon and nutmeg, his favorites. I let him have his silence. Let him grieve in the corners of the house I'd finally reclaimed. It wasn't victory that filled me then. It was closure. The kind that doesn't slam doors or scream final words. Just a deep breath, and the steady beat of your own heartbeat in a house that feels like yours again. I sat down with the boys a few days later, not because I had to, because I wanted to. It was after dinner David had gone upstairs for a call and the dishes were drying on the rack. Eli and Jonah were curled up on the couch sharing a blanket and watching some cartoon with flashing lights and overly loud sound effects. I turned down the volume and sat on the ottoman in front of them. "Can we talk for a few minutes?" I asked. Eli paused the show. Both boys looked at me with those big, innocent eyes, the kind that hadn't yet learned how deep betrayal can cut. "I want to talk about your mom." They tensed immediately. I noticed how quickly Jonah looked to Eli, and how Eli straightened his back like he'd been preparing for this moment quietly for weeks. "You're not in trouble," I said softly. "You haven't done anything wrong, but I think you deserve to know some things. And I think you're old enough to hear them. They didn't speak, just watched me. I took a breath. Your mom left. Not because of you, not because of anything you said or did. She left because sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt the people around them. Jonah looked confused. Like bad choices. Yes, I said gently. Some choices that weren't fair, some that were dishonest, and some that hurt your dad. And me. Eli's voice was quiet, like taking the money. I blinked. He nodded. I heard Dad on the phone. He said she took our college money. I didn't lie. Yes, that happened. They were both still, but not in shock. They'd known more than we thought. She was mad a lot, Jonah whispered. She yelled when you weren't around. Eli nodded. And she always told us not to tell. That hit me in the chest. Not because I didn't expect it, but because of how easily a child can learn to hold someone else's secret in their body like it's their own fault. I'm sorry, I said. I should have seen more. I should have spoken up sooner. Eli frowned. But you fixed it. I smiled gently, brushing the hair from his forehead. I did my best to protect you. That's what grandmas do. Jonah reached out and touched my hand. Is she gonna come back? I thought about it. No, not the way things were. But maybe later. Maybe I said honestly, but it'll look different. Because when people hurt us, they don't just get to walk back in like nothing happened. They have to change. And we have to heal. Eli leaned against me. I'm glad you're here. I'm always here. That night I wrote in my journal, the same one I'd started the day I moved into this house before it had turned cold before Tessa started her campaign of quiet dismissal. I wrote they know, and they're okay. They're more okay than I was at their age. Maybe that's something. Maybe it means we're breaking the pattern, because that's what trauma is, isn't it? A pattern that keeps spinning itself into new generations unless someone grabs the scissors. David came downstairs as I was closing the notebook. They're asleep. I nodded. You told them they already knew more than we realized. He exhaled long and slow. You did the right thing, he said. I looked at him. I'm not just here to fold socks and pass the salt at dinner. I know. Do you? I asked gently. He looked down. I'm learning. That was enough for now. Over the next few weeks, things settled into a new rhythm. David met with a financial advisor. They started building the education fund again. Slowly, but with clarity, the boys began therapy. Not because anything was broken, but because sometimes talking to someone who isn't related to you helps loosen the knots. Tessa tried to contact them once, an email to David. He didn't respond. He showed it to me. It was long, rambling, defensive. Not an apology, just justification. I was under pressure. You never saw what I carried. I did what I had to. No remorse. Just self-preservation. I told David to archive it. Not delete it. Not respond. Just put it away. The past has a way of resurfacing. But you don't need to invite it in for tea every time it knocks. Lisa called to check in. I thanked her for holding the flash drive, for never asking questions she didn't need to. She told me I sounded different. You sound steady, she said. I feel steady. It wasn't happiness, not exactly, but it was something close. Maybe peace doesn't come from everything being perfect. Maybe it comes from knowing you finally acted when it mattered most. The neighborhood had noticed the change too. No more awkward glances, no more clipped conversations in the grocery aisle, just a quiet shift. Mtses. Donnelly from 2 houses down brought me soup. Mr. Elzada, Worth offered to help replant the flower beds that Tessa had let go to weeds. Not pity, just acknowledgement. The kind people offer when they realize you've lived through a storm and come out a little stronger for it. And every evening when I tucked the boys in, when I walked past the empty office, when I saw David doing the dishes without anyone asking him to, I knew. I hadn't just protected myself, I'd protected a legacy, one built not on control or appearances or fragile politeness, but on truth. And that's the kind of foundation that holds. It started small. A tilted glance at the grocery store from Cheryl, who used to play bridge with Tessa once a month. A subtle pause in the church parking lot from the Wilsons, their smiles just a little too tight. At first I thought it was pity, but then I heard the whispers. Not cruel ones, not loud, just curious. She really left. And with the money, no less. I always wondered about her. Something behind the eyes. Word had gotten out. Not because we told anyone. David and I had been careful, private. But these things always find their way to the surface. People fill in the blanks even when you don't hand them the pen. The first direct question came from Judy Simmons, the postmaster's wife. She caught me outside the bakery one morning. "I'm so sorry, Maggie," she said, voice soft. I blinked. "Sorry for what?" She leaned in just a little. "I heard about Tessa, that whole situation. You know, if you ever need anything." I smiled politely. "Thank you, Judy. We're managing." She nodded like she expected me to say more. I didn't, because I didn't owe anyone the whole story, but I also wasn't ashamed of it anymore. Later that day, I met Lisa for coffee. It was the first time we'd seen each other in person since I gave her the flash drive. We sat outside under an umbrella, the late spring breeze pulling at the napkins. "You look taller," she said. I laughed. "That's just the weight off my shoulders." She tilted her head. "I'm proud of you." That nearly broke me, because I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone said that without an ounce of judgment or agenda. "I didn't know I had it in me," I said. "You always did. You just forgot for a while." We sat in comfortable silence after that. Sometimes healing doesn't come in a rush. It arrives in the small moments. In feeling seen again, in taking up space in a room without apologizing for it. Back home, the garden had started to bloom again. I'd pulled up the dead shrubs and planted new rose bushes. Jonah helped me water them every afternoon, still wearing his school shoes splashing mud on his pants. I didn't stop him. I wanted him to have that freedom, to know that dirt under your nails is sometimes a sign of life, not mess. Eli was working on a school project, Family Legacies. He asked me questions every night. Did Grandpa Henry build his own garage? What was Dad like as a kid? Why did you become a teacher? I answered them all. And one night, as he scribbled down notes with his tongue stuck out in concentration, he said, "I think you're the strongest person I know." I looked at him. He didn't mean it like a compliment. He meant it like truth. And that's when it hit me that this story, my story, wouldn't be told through legal documents or whispered apologies. It would be told through them, through the way they watched me now, the way they trusted me, respected me. Tessa hadn't just tried to erase my presence from this home, she'd tried to erase my legacy. But you can't erase someone who's rooted themselves in truth. The neighborhood gossip started fading. People moved on, found new things to talk about. Tessa's absence was no longer scandal. It was reality. David started taking the boys out more fishing, hiking, Sunday drives. He didn't bring up her name. He didn't need to, but he did something else. One afternoon, he came home early from work, found me on the porch clipping the dead heads off the roses. He sat down beside me, quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm going to see a counselor." I looked up surprised. "For yourself?" He nodded. "I think I need to figure out how I let it get this far, and why I kept making excuses." I put my gloved hand on his knee. "That's the bravest thing you've said since this all started." He smiled faint and real. "I don't want to carry this forward. Not into another relationship. Not into raising the boys." I nodded. "Then you're already breaking the cycle." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I had this printed today. Inside was a copy of the new house deed. My name. His name. Equal ownership." "You didn't have to do this," I said, blinking fast. "I wanted to," he said. "You saved this house. You saved me." I didn't cry, but I sat there on the porch for a long time after he went inside, the envelope resting on my lap. Because it wasn't about the property, it was about being seen, respected, claimed, not as a guest, but as the matriarch, the person who held the roots while everything else tried to drift away. And when I tucked that envelope into my journal that night, I didn't write anything, because sometimes the silence says everything. It was a slow Sunday morning, the kind where the light comes in soft and golden, and the kettle whistles before the birds finish their first song. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, flipping through an old photo album. The pages were worn, the edges curled, but the faces smiled back at me like they always had. Henry in his garage, smudged with grease but grinning. David as a boy holding a frog with both hands and a look of pure joy. A younger me in a gingham dress holding a pie and laughing at something Henry had just said. So much life in those pages. So many stories. And now new stories. Different, but just as real. The boys padded into the kitchen in their pajamas, hair sticking up, still half asleep. They plopped down beside me and peeked over my shoulder. "Who's that?" Jonah asked, pointing at a photo of Henry in his Navy uniform. "That's your granddad when he was young," I said, before he opened the garage. "Whoa," Eli said. "He looks like a movie star." I chuckled. He used to say the same thing about himself. They giggled. David came in not long after, still yawning, scratching his head. He poured himself a coffee, and for the first time in what felt like years, there was no tension in the room, no eggshells, just ease. Later that morning, we went to the park. It was nothing special, just a few swings, a sandbox, and a crooked old bench. But it was ours. The same bench Henry and I used to sit on while David chased butterflies. The same tree I leaned against when I read aloud from library books on long summer days. David watched the boys from the path while I sat on the bench. "Feels different now," he said, sitting beside me. "How so?" He thought about it. "I think I finally understand what you meant. About the kind of love that doesn't shrink." I didn't say anything. "Just let him speak." He stared at the boys a moment longer. "I used to think love meant keeping the peace, letting things go, not stirring the pot. But that's not love. That's fear dressed up as diplomacy." I nodded. "Real love makes space." even when it's uncomfortable." He smiled a little. "You always made space. I wanted you to know you were allowed to take up room, to become who you were meant to be." He was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "What's this?" I asked. "A letter. From Tessa." I tensed. He handed it over without a word. I unfolded it slowly. It wasn't long. A few paragraphs, neat handwriting. No tears smudged the ink. She said she was staying with her cousin down south, that she was working on herself, that she missed the boys, that she hoped one day we could all coexist peacefully. There was no apology, no accountability, just vague sentiments and soft language. I folded the letter and handed it back. "Are you going to let her see them?" "I don't know," he said. "Not yet. That's fair." He looked at me then, serious. "What would you do?" I paused. "I'd wait. See if the words match the actions. See if she actually changes. Not for us, for herself." He nodded. "Because if she doesn't," I added, "the boys will feel it. They already know what safety looks like now. They'll recognize the difference." He tucked the letter away. I leaned back on the bench, letting the breeze graze my face. "Mom," he said after a while, "I've been thinking." "Dangerous?" I teased. He laughed. "No, really. I want you to write it all down. Write what this story, all of it, everything you saw, everything you did." I blinked. "Why?" "Because it matters. Because someday Eli and Jonah are going to grow up and have their own relationships, their own families, and I want them to know the difference between quiet love and silent suffering." I stared at the playground, the way the boys chased each other in circles, laughing so hard they tripped over nothing. "You think they'll understand?" "Not now," he said, "but someday." I looked at him. "I'll do it, but only if you promise me something. Anything. Tell them your part too. The ways you failed. The ways you learned." He nodded. "Deal." When we got home that afternoon, I went to the guest room, which wasn't a guest room anymore. It was my room now. David had even painted it for me soft green, just like the kitchen Henry and I used to have in our first house. I pulled out my journal and wrote the date at the top of a new page. And then slowly I began, not with the dinner that broke me, but with the life I'd built before it. The love I'd held, the mistakes I'd made, the truths I'd uncovered, and the strength I'd found in the silence. Because closure doesn't come when the other person apologizes. It comes when you stop waiting for them to, when you decide your story is worth telling whether they ever listen or not. That night I read the boys a bedtime story, one of the old ones about a woman who outsmarted a king and saved her village. At the end, Jonah yawned and asked, "Was she real?" I smiled. "Yes," I whispered. "She just knew how to stay quiet. Until the right moment." It's strange how a house can breathe again. After everything, the lies, the silence, the weight of unsaid things. This house feels different now. Lighter. Like it finally let out a breath it's been holding for years. I hosted dinner that night. My dinner. My table. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't wait for a convenient time on anyone else's calendar. I just cooked. Roast chicken with rosemary, mashed potatoes from scratch, green beans sautéed with garlic, Henry's favorite meal, and dessert, of course, apple crisp with vanilla ice cream melting just the way the boys like it. David came early, helped set the table. Eli made name cards out of construction paper, even though it was just us. Jonah placed forks in all the wrong places. I didn't correct him, because none of that mattered. What mattered was that we were together, free, honest. By 6 o'clock, the kitchen smelled like every memory I ever wanted to hold on to. Laughter echoed down the hall. The boys wrestled in the living room, and for the first time in a long time, I felt no need to brace for anything. There was no tension buzzing under the surface, no rehearsed lines or fake smiles. Just love. David looked around as we finished setting the plates. "This is what it's supposed to feel like," he said. I nodded. "Yes. Not perfect, but safe." He set the final napkin and turned to me. "Thank you." I tilted my head. "For what?" "For saving us." I didn't reply right away. Instead, I walked to the sideboard and opened a drawer, pulled out a thin manila envelope. I handed it to him. "What's this?" "My will," I said softly. His face paled. "Mum, relax. I'm not going anywhere, but I want things to be clear, simple. You'll find the house is fully in both our names now, but your boys, they'll inherit it. Eventually." He stared at the envelope, blinking fast. "I don't want this place to be remembered as the house where things fell apart," I continued. "I want it to be remembered as the house where we rebuilt." He nodded, too emotional to speak. The timer went off. Dinner was ready. I called the boys in, and we sat at the table 4 seats now instead of 5, and that was okay, because not all empty chairs are tragedies, some are choices. We said grace, a simple one. Thank you for this food for each other, and for the second chances we didn't know we needed. The boys dug in. I watched them laugh, argue over the last roll pass each other napkins without being asked. I watched David. He was present now, grounded. He helped Jonah scoop more potatoes without complaining, complimented the food, asked the boys questions, and actually listened to the answers. He'd come back to himself. And I had come home to me. After dinner, while the boys played a board game on the floor, David and I sat on the porch. The sun was setting. The sky was orange and purple, like it knew how to end things beautifully. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. "Uh-oh." He smiled. "I want to write something too. A letter. For the boys. About all of this." I nodded. "They'll appreciate that. And I want you to read it first." I looked at him surprised. "You sure I trust you?" I rested my hand on his. "I trust you too." We sat in silence for a while, watching the stars peek out one by one. He stood, eventually went inside to tuck the boys in. I stayed outside, watched the wind shift the leaves, listened to the distant hum of crickets waking up. And I thought about forgiveness. Not the kind you offer someone who deserves it. The kind you offer so you can breathe again. Tessa would always be a name in our story, but she didn't get to write the ending. We did. Together. From a place of clarity, strength, and yes, love. Not the kind that bends until it breaks, the kind that stands firm, that grows roots, that whispers, "You're allowed to start over." I closed my eyes, leaned back in the chair Henry built with his own 2 hands, and smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was true. And that after everything is the only kind of peace that lasts.